Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents Hometown Haunts. I'm your host, Kat Klockow, and tonight I have with me Christina, Wald and Jen Koehler, and a very great guest a little bit later on in the show, James A. Willis, paranormal author from Ohio extraordinaire. So we have that fun interview. Of course, you can catch up to us on Twitter at Sin Cabinet Curio and on Instagram at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities. And also cincycuriosities at gmail.com. We're also an official podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud now, so please like, subscribe, and rate it so other people who love spooky things just like you can find us. So, Christina, you had something you wanted to share with Thanksgiving in mind.
Yes, and because we have a long interview today, we're not getting to do quite as many weird things as usual. But don't worry, we'll make up for it next week. But I thought it was interesting. A lot of things with Thanksgiving tend to be a little bit fraught. History is always sort of glossed over. And so I thought this was a really interesting way that kind of segues into what we talk about. And a lot of Native Americans up in, and this person I think is up in Michigan, they do a ghost supper, which is a different form of Thanksgiving for Native peoples. And the quote says, "One major difference, I was taught that the barrier between the living and the spirit world is weaker during the season. We take advantage of this so the entire extended family can eat together. The more I grew, the more families we went, and we participated in more host ghost suppers. It became a perpetual event that would be celebrated over the course of late October through early December." So I thought that was a really interesting idea to celebrate both indigenous culture and to be aware of this thinner veil during the holiday season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really good.
And I'll have a link
nice.
to the whole article in the I'll have a link to the whole article in the show notes. And we'll have links to all the books and stuff. Did anyone else have anything to say about Thanksgiving kind of ghosty stuff?
Well, I have a doozy of a story that has to do with Thanksgiving, but we can share it next week. Other than the weird thing found in Utah. But that, Jen, that was yours.
Do you want me to talk about it?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. This weird monolith just appeared in the Utah desert. While the Utah State Police or Highway Patrol were out looking to count bighorn sheep in the southeastern part of the state, and they came across this item that was found buried in the middle of nowhere. And the Utah Highway Patrol asking the public what they think it is. One person suggested it fell off the UFO we've been seeing in Ogden lately.
Whoa. That's a casual thing to drop. Oh, right? I think it was the UFO dropped it, of course.
I'm not sure how much sarcasm was used with that one.
While no alien craft have been officially seen in the area, nothing can be ruled out. Most likely it's just a piece of sheet metal placed in the ground as a prank or hoax. However, if you get close enough and hear someone say, "Open the pod bay doors, Hal," you better run. Officials won't announce the exact location of the object as it's in a very remote area, and if individuals were to attempt to visit the area, there is a significant possibility they may become stranded and require rescue.
Oh.
So, but it looks like the monolith from 2001 Space Odyssey, but it's silver metal, not black. Mm-hmm. And it's literally standing straight up out of the ground.
I wonder if it's an art installation by somebody.
It almost looked like one. And I don't know if we can share the photo or not. We can put a link in the show notes so people can look at it and judge for themselves. It does look like somebody's senior project in art class, sort of a, making a monolith, circa 2001.
Well, and I think it's very kind of in right now to like kind of hide your artwork so people can just happen upon it.
That's true because you have those what are those art drops where people will just drop art anywhere for people to pick up. It's an interesting movement. I don't totally understand it, but maybe because I probably couldn't just drop a piece of art somewhere.
No. Well, those tend to be a lot smaller.
Yes.
It also reminds me of geocaching almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot
Kind
of
of
that.
like a treasure hunt or something.
Yeah. It's just, I'm surprised there aren't more things like that for spooky cryptid things already, or even alien UFO. It's, yeah. So,
But don't go looking for it because you'll get stranded. And don't get stranded in the desert. It's not good.
But yeah, in Death Valley, remember people were getting like there's all these old like I guess trails and stuff in Death Valley that GPSs were catching up, were using as their maps. I assume it's much better now. And people would run out of gas and be driven in. Remember early GPS, how bad it was, and you would be driving around in circles and stuff. Well, that's okay, like if you're in Ohio, but if you're in Death Valley, people were running out of gas.
Oh no.
Well,
It'd be running them on some crazy trail that didn't go somewhere, making them do circles or whatever.
No.
Yeah, that's not good.
GPSs were invented by the devil.
Hello, everyone. It's Kat Klockow here, and with us tonight, we have a fantastic guest that I am super jazzed decided to join us on the show and accepted our invitation. And this is my friend, James A. Willis, a very famous paranormal writer and author in Ohio. Hi, James.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, I'm happy that you're here. So I'm going to read a very short bio for all of our wonderful listeners and our viewers on YouTube. What makes your work stand out over everyone else's in Ohio? So, James was fueled by a steady childhood diet of blueberry cereal, creepy magazine, and the late-night Vincent Price movies. James soon developed a taste for the unexplained and quirky, and quickly began seeking out all things strange and spooky. He is the co-author of Weird Ohio, which is how I first know you, Weird Indiana, and also is a contributing author to Weird US, Weird Hauntings, and Weird US 2, The Odyssey. The Odyssey Continues. Let's see, where am I? And Weird Encounters. James' unique and offbeat writing style was officially recognized in 2006 with his induction to the Grand Order of Weird Writers. In addition, James has been a contributing author to several books in the Armchair Reader series, including Weird and Scary and Unusual, Armchair Reader Goes to Hollywood, The Haunted America, and in 2012, James struck out on his own with the publication of Haunted Indiana. For the 2013s, the Big Book of Ohio Ghost Stories, you crisscrossed Ohio to bring readers to over 75 of the Buckeye State's most famous and infamous ghosts. And you also wrote Ohio's Historic Haunts, investigating the paranormal in the Buckeye State, with a joint effort with Kent State University Press. And released in late 2015, the book approached hauntings and ghost stories from historical perspectives and chronicled James's personal experiences when locked inside some of Ohio's most haunted locations. You are also the founder of Ghosts of Ohio Paranormal Investigation and Research Team, as well as a good friend to the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities comics anthology. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Wow, do you need a drink of water after that? That was
I slightly may need that.
That was
yeah,
more
that
than
was
a
a lot,
there.
And that's the abridged biography, everyone. I stumbled over a few parts, but that's just because I'm so excited, because whenever we're at paranormal conferences, we just geek out over all paranormal things happening here in Ohio. We have so much strange stuff.
We do. As you mentioned, I've worked with a couple of the different states for the Weird US series of books, and I keep coming back to, even though I wasn't born in Ohio is really, really weird. And I think what is really cool about Ohio and the Buckeye State is that we're proud to be weird. Some of the other states that I did, they were kind of really reluctant to sort of embrace their weirdness. And so a lot of the stories they didn't want to share. No, it's not the case in Ohio. I would be out when I was doing Weird Ohio and taking pictures or doing research, and somebody would come up and say, well, what are you doing? And I would say, well, it's for a book, Weird Ohio. And they would say, well, if you think this is weird, you need to check this out. A lot of times it was relatives of theirs that I was like, no, it's not the kind of weird I'm comfortable with. But yeah, it's Ohioans are very, very proud to be weird. So
Yeah.
it's a great place to be.
Yeah, it's I'm from Indiana, and people in the Hoosier State don't share stories. It depends on where. I'm from northern Indiana, so they're a little bit more reluctant to share the ghost stories. But if you go to southern Indiana, they're just like, yes, let me tell you about all the Wolfman sightings we've
Yeah.
seen down this one street or this one stretch of land. And it's fun talking to them. I know actually our first encounter with the Ohio Mermaids in the Ohio River was from Weird Ohio. That's how I knew of the story. And Jay Kagayan, I'm sorry, Jay, and Dylan, they wrote, he has a, just like me, he has a tricky last name. They wrote the Ohio River Mermaids. Now we dropped the mud portion of that, but we still retold the story of the mermaids being witnessed swimming through the Ohio River outside of Vivi, Indiana.
Yep.
And we got that story from Weird Ohio.
There you go.
Thanks to you. How did you find that story?
Way back when, and it's funny because I look back and I'm like, wow, that was like in 2004. What the stories in general, they started off with, we kind of had a short list that Mark and Mark, the two weird Marks from Weird New Jersey, who were producing the books, they had kind of set us off on this path with a set list of stories. It was sort of a short list. But then what would normally happen is I was doing research, I would all of a sudden stumble across these other weird things, and it would sort of go on and on. I mean, the mermaid story, I'm trying to think back, but I think where I had started was with this is interesting. There's all sort of weird connections here because it was one of my favorite Ohio cryptids is the Loveland Frog,
Yes.
which if you remember, you actually helped me translate the Japanese of a little Loveland Frog figure that I had found.
Yes.
But when I was doing research for Weird Ohio, for the Loveland Frog story, something that has always intrigued me about that is that most people will focus on the 1972 sightings of the Loveland Frog, and then some will slip in, they'll go back to 1955, where there was a gentleman by the name of Honeycutt who had a sighting, and they will actually say that that was the Loveland Frog. What was fascinating to me about that is that if you read the reports that Honeycutt, he was actually interviewed by somebody and they took down all the information. What he describes is not the same thing as a Loveland Frog. He reported seeing three, I think there were three, there were several, and they were crouched underneath a bridge. And then one of them held up this blue rod that he said sparks flew out of. Well, that to me isn't anything that people have reported with the sightings of the Loveland Frog. So I was like, well, that's interesting because that's a totally different cryptid. So I started down that path and then found out that right around this time that Honeycutt had his sighting in 1955, there were similar creatures that were sighted in Hopkinsville / Kelly,
Yes.
Kentucky, the goblins. So I was like, well, wait, okay, so now I'm off on this tangent and I'm looking at things in Kentucky and I'm no longer looking for frogs. I'm looking for, some people were calling them trolls, other people were calling them goblins. And then on top of that, all of a sudden it got mashed together because I was following the Little Miami River around because that's where the Loveland Frog was sighted, and trying to see if there were other sightings in that area. And eventually I stumbled across in Indiana, the Beast of Busco, which somebody believes is actually just a giant snapping turtle.
Yeah.
But again, it was like, wait, okay, here's another creature sighting. And then lo and behold, start tracing that back and mermaids pop up. So so that was a very long twisted tale, but that's how most of everything that I write is that you start with one item and then all of a sudden you start building all these other things which pop out, and a lot of them become urban legends and they fall by the wayside. But to me, an urban legend or a folk tale is just as important as a quote unquote true ghost story, in that they
Mhm.
all kind of merge together. And I think they're all a significant part of Ohio history. Even if you can't prove these things are real, enough people have talked about it or experienced it that they do become part of our weird history.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. It did not dawn on me that the first Loveland Frog Man sighting really is jives with Kelly Hopkinsville.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, but when you said 1955, I was like, wait a minute, that's a famous encounter. And you're right, the original report, when I was reading through them for reviewing them for Jay and Dylan, I remember seeing that original 55 report and going, well, this doesn't sound like the same thing. This actually sounds like an alien encounter almost. And it's not really close to Wright Pat at all, but I know they do see strange things along the Little Miami River.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought I would mention that. I also, in that, except for the Armchair series, in that intro, I own every one of those books.
Wow.
Yeah. I was only able to pull out two of them because the rest of them were in a bookshelf in my storage area. Not that I'm storing you away. It's
That's
just
fine.
I was rearranging my studio a little while ago. But the other thing I find really interesting, and I think Jen was the one who pointed this one out, is you're doing the Crybaby Bridge project.
Yes.
Is that project still alive?
It is still alive. It's that is truly a labor of love for me, because I was born and raised in upstate New York, and there was, I think that's what really made me weird, is because in the Hudson Valley there is just, you've got the Headless Horseman, you've got a lot of UFO sightings that took place in the 80s. They've got all sorts of monsters running around there. So I was always chasing after weird things just because of the area I grew up in. And there was what I thought was the Crybaby Bridge. I only knew of one in New York State at the time. And this is dating myself, but this was back in like the early 80s. But there was only one bridge. And I was naive and arrogant enough to think there was only one out there and that I found it. And I went to college in Atlanta. And when I moved down there, just happened to come up a conversation that I like chasing after weird things. And somebody said, well, you got to go check out the Crybaby Bridge. And I'm like, well, that's in New York. And they were like, no, the real one is here. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then when I moved to Ohio, I found out that there were several more. And I'm like, no, this isn't true. This isn't true. The real one is in New York. And when I was doing Weird Ohio, I decided to try to sort of chronicle all of the different Crybaby bridges. And I think there were 13 then. So back in 2004, that's all there was. And I got more emails about those when people were like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's those 13, none of them are right. The real one is here. So I decided, where is the real one? You know,
Mhm.
and so I decided, I started the Ohio Crybaby Bridge Project, which is an attempt to basically have this sort of storehouse, if you will, of information about every crybaby bridge that is supposedly in existence in Ohio. I had to actually broaden it because originally the earliest version I heard was that it was an actual bridge and it went over water,
Hmm.
and that the mother accidentally dropped the child off the bridge and it drowned. Um, that story, because good old urban legends never die, they just mutate every couple of years.
Yeah.
There's on the Ohio Crybaby Bridge Project, I have Crybaby tunnels. There's a Crybaby hill. There are overpasses. There are train tracks. There's basically anything high enough that if you threw or dropped a baby off of could potentially kill it. Those are actually on there. And to me,
Yeah.
what became the sort of weird historian was trying to find out, what is Bridge Zero in Ohio? Where did all of these start from? And I haven't found that yet.
Mhm.
Um, I have yet to find the any bridge, but specifically any bridge in Ohio where there is a confirmed death of a child or our mother with a child or anything like that. I have found bridges where there have been murders of
Mhm.
adults. There have been one instance that I can think of where a body had been dumped near the bridge. But yeah, it's just a fascinating thing. And what I love about it is it's all up on my website and people go in there and then they actually tell their versions to me. And I put those up there because what I'm doing sort of behind the scenes is I'm tracing each of these legends back to try to find out, like when people write to me, I'm like, well, do you know how old you were when you first heard the story? And what was the story as you know it? Because as I said, these things change. If you look up any of the bridges that are in the database, there's multiple variations.
Mhm.
A few years ago, um, doing what I call the rituals at the bridges became all the thing. It used to be you just went to the bridge at a certain time. It was usually Halloween and a certain, Halloween midnight kind of thing. And then you had to honk your horn 3 times or flash your lights 3 times. Now they have all sorts of bizarre things you have to do where one, which I don't understand why anybody would do this, but you're supposed to leave the car running, lock the keys in the car, and then walk away. And when you come back, the car will be turned off. Yeah, I don't understand. I think there was probably some adult beverages possibly involved in that variation, but
I'm still surprised
um,
they have their car.
yeah, exactly. And did it is the car not running because the battery died, or it's just a strange thing. But I love it because I can usually tell when these stories have started based on classic urban legends being inserted into it because you normally in the 70s, if the story originated in the 70s, it's usually got a serial killer in there.
Yep.
And in the 80s, it's usually a satanic cult that's lurking
Yep.
nearby. So to me, I love those little things. Most people are like, you're just weird. And I'm like, well, thanks.
That
Because life's
really
boring.
indicates, sorry, just jumping on
No,
that,
you're
that
fine.
really indicates what the culture at large was afraid of at the
Yes,
time. So in the
exactly.
70s, you had Bundy and a whole bunch of serial killers
Yes.
running amok around the United States and other parts of the world. And then in the 80s and early 90s, we had the Satanic Panic and
Yep,
child
exactly.
snatching.
Yep.
So that's why I love urban legends and why it's actually important to document everyone's encounters like this.
Mhm.
Um, Basically, the Crybaby Bridge project is just a dream to anybody who is an anthropology or folklore major because you're doing so much field research by just collecting all these personal experiences.
Yeah, and
And
and it's fun to do it. I mean, it's a lot of people look at it and they're like, "No, what's the point of all this?" And I'm like, "It's our history." I
mhm,
mean, I've met so many people that are just like, "Well, I knew that story and I went out there and nothing happened, but I will never forget when I went out there and we all got scared and there was nothing there, but it was part of their history. So it's something I love doing.
yeah, yeah, I do too. That's why we have this very weird podcast going on. What is your favorite Ohio ghost story, urban legend, or creepy creature?
Wow, I can only pick one.
Okay, well, if you can quickly go through all of them.
Well, definitely the Loveland Frog in terms of like cryptids. I when it comes to sort of extraterrestrials, UFO, obviously it's Right Pat, and the whole
Mhm.
idea that if anything fell out of the sky, it made its way to Right Pat. So the whole connection with Roswell and any other famous UFO crashes, um, I'm fascinated with that. In terms of my favorite ghost story, I mean I jump all over. I sort of like I've got like a top 5 and then one will jump up to the front and I'll obsess over it forever. But I guess the one that I think probably is the most endearing to me is, again, growing up with the Headless Horseman. When I moved to Ohio, I found, and I don't know why, but there is an overabundance of headless motorcycle ghosts.
Yes.
So I think the one down in Oxford is probably one that it's definitely my top 2 because
Mhm.
for a number of reasons. Again, because I've kind of upgraded from headless horsemen to headless motorcycle guys. My wife is from Oxford, Ohio. Her parents still live down there, and that also means that each time when there was an old normal as opposed to a new normal, we would visit each other. I would go down there with my wife and now my daughter, and we would try to see the light from the headless motorcycle. And
Mhm.
we did see it
Oh,
numerous,
wow.
numerous times. Sadly, there was a time when I could actually give presentations in public, and
Yes.
I would bring video of it, and I would tell people, I'm just going to explain where we were, what we were doing, and now you guys take this story and you find out for yourself what's going on. And I would give them directions, tell them what they do and not to do, and it was just a way to share stories. But yeah, you do see a light on the road that I can't explain.
Yeah, it's. I've seen that footage because I've seen a few of your talks. It's very, very spooky. So now we're going to bring on Christina and Jen to ask a few questions before our time is up.
Cool. And there they are.
And there they are.
There.
Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Yeah, I was absolutely fascinated by the bridge story, and because we were talking about the ubiquitousness, if that's a word, of certain stories. And if you found that in your research, like when I did the Satan's Hollow story in the comic, and we found a very similar story in New Jersey, only it was much bigger drain. And is that like a typical sort of tale that you see? Like, are a lot of these urban legends, typical?
I think for the most part, yes, they are. But Ohio, as I said, they're a very weird state and they're proud of it. So when it comes to those sort of urban legends, I found that Ohioans are more likely to actually take a good urban legend and run with it and make it their own. So you're exactly right. The Satan's Hollow is quite similar to other stories, notably in New Jersey, which has, I think they call theirs the Gates of Hell. Well, there's also a Gates of Hell supposedly in Clintonville, outside of Columbus in Ohio, that I may or may not have visited. That is incredibly similar in construction as to Satan's Hollow, which I may or may not have visited. But taking all that into consideration, specifically with that, I have found, and it's why I love Ohio, they have an overabundance of headless motorcycle ghosts and hell type places, and you could insert the private joke there if you'd like, but to me, it's fascinating that there are a lot of, when you look at the idea of the gates of hell, most people will say that there's supposedly, I think, 7 of them, and they're throughout the world. Well, there's 3 in Ohio. So what does that tell you about Ohio?
Seems
I think it says a
plausible.
lot about the people in Ohio, in that they love those kind of stories, and it's the basic cautionary tale sort of thing. It's like, don't go in there. And then Ohioans are like, I'm going to go, and so they couldn't just have one gate of hell. They had to have 3 of them. There couldn't be one Satan's Hollow. I think there's actually a second one. It might be called something different. There's one up outside of Cleveland as well.
I was
And they're
just
all
thinking,
drainage things.
the thing that was rolling through my head when you said that was, don't mess with Ohioans, we'll summon Satan.
Yeah. And I tried to look at it from the sort of religious aspect, because I was like, is there something in there because of how Ohioans in general are their religious beliefs bringing up these stories? But when I looked at in Indiana, why they had a couple, they were nowhere near what they had in Ohio. Now there was his name escapes me, but during that whole satanic panic, there was an expert who he made the rounds on Geraldo and all these things, and he would testify at numerous crimes, and he was still around because I think he was actually the cult expert for the prosecutor for the West Memphis 3. Griffith, I think his last name is. He was from Ohio. And so you're like, okay, is him being there and being the expert, did that give rise to all of these other stories and cause them to spread? So again, it's weird research to do, but it's something that I just love to do. But to answer your question, in general, yeah, I found a lot of the most common urban legends do have a home in Ohio. They've just mutated. There are very few Hookman stories, which is sort of interesting because I think there's maybe 2 or 3 that I know of in Ohio, but that's all over the place, which if you really wanted to fall down the rabbit hole, going back to the Crybaby Bridge stories, I thought that was a New York thing. Then I found out it was a Georgia thing, and it's really an Ohio thing. I think there's 40 of them. There's not one in every state. And so it's like, well, what's the criteria there? Because really all you need is a bridge in the middle of nowhere, and you make up a story about why a woman is up on a bridge, or you just say the woman was up on the bridge with her baby. So you don't need a lot of, unique terrain. But there are some states where I have not found a single Crybaby anything story. So again, those are the things that thankfully keep me up at night. It's always
And I don't know. I'm sorry I missed like the first 5 minutes of the interview that you did, Kat, because I was looking for my phone so I could time this. but did you ask what are you working on now?
Yeah, I did not ask that.
Okay. So what are you working on now? You had started to tell us before we started recording.
Yeah, there's actually 2 books that I'm working on right now. And the really neat thing is, for the first time since 2003, I'm just sort of writing for me, because usually the publishers, and I always felt bad when people came up and they were like, well, how do you get a book published? What do you do? And I was like, I don't know, because the publishers were coming to me. And it was something that I felt truly blessed about, but I always felt like people were like, yeah, you just don't want to tell me. But this was the first time where I basically said, I want to write something what I want to write about. And so one of them is something rather similar to Ohio's Historic Haunts, which is where I took haunted historic locations and really dug up the, no pun intended, but the history of it, and then spent the night locked in the building. There's that. And then there is another one, which I don't want to jinx it, so I don't want to give too much away, but it is basically it's something I think was missing from the paranormal field in general. Because I found that over the years, the paranormal is very polarizing, and that is that people either totally believe in everything or they don't believe in any of it. And I try to go down the middle, because I'm not naive enough to think that we have all the answers. If for no other reason that I don't want that to be true, because then life would be incredibly boring. But, I go out at night, and just look up at the stars, and I'm like, there's stuff out there. There has to be, so I want to believe that there are other things out there. But the flip side of that is the skeptics don't want to have anything to do with me, because they're like, well, you believe in that stuff. And I'm like, no, I just believe we don't have the answers yet. The flip side is when I try to tell people not every ghost story is true. Not everything you hear in the woods is Bigfoot. I get disinvited to paranormal conventions, but to me, I like to walk that middle thing, because like I said, we don't have all the answers, but I can't expect people to take me serious in this field unless I'm willing to admit, and I do, that there's a lot of BS in this field. There's a lot of wishful thinking, and I think that's what gets this field in trouble. So I have sort of created this thing that I don't want to jinx yet, but I think it is fairly unique, that I think both skeptics and believers in the paranormal can come together, hopefully, over this and look at it and go, okay, I don't believe in this stuff, but I can see where you guys are coming from. And the flip side saying, I can see why you think we're all crazy, but I can see why some of this stuff can't be explained. So it's something I put a lot of thought into, and I think it will kind of have its own place there, because it's bizarre when I see these things, and thankfully I just step aside and let people fight amongst themselves. But it's weird when you hear people just like arguing and yelling at each other and stuff, and you're like, you guys realize you're yelling about Bigfoot, right? You know, it's like,
It's very strange when you hear those arguments going on.
yes,
It seems like that's sort of like where argument has gone. Like it's sort of all, and that could be a whole separate discussion on, how things have become it's sort of contradiction rather than a real argument, or when
yes,
you talk about facts and evidence and stuff. I mean, it seems like that is a problem in all life now. It's all or nothing, which is
yes.
crazy.
That's not really how the world works.
No.
But when that project gets complete, please come back onto the show, James.
Oh, I would love to. We don't have to wait for that. This is a blast.
Well,
I mean,
yay!
I like
Jen,
to spin a yarn or two, so you just let me know and I'll be here.
Woo! Jen, did you have any questions?
Yeah, and a question going back to what you said about how things can be polarizing. Is there like a well-known haunted house or well-known ghost story that you kind of proven or think isn't true, but everybody else believes it to be absolutely true?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've ever disproven anything. I'm a firm believer in when people say, well, I investigated that building. Oh, what did you do? Well, we went there for about 6 hours and I had some pizza and then I went home. And I'm like, well, why did you go there at that particular time? Well, that was when the tour was. That to me isn't really an investigation. It's a ghost hunt kind of, but I'm a firm believer in just because I go there for say one night and nothing happens, I always say it just means the ghostly fish weren't biting that particular. It doesn't mean it's not haunted. And so a lot of our private investigations are usually 4, 5, 6 visits to a location before we form any sort of opinion. So I don't know if I've ever totally disproven anything. I know that there are a lot of sort of the public places that they go to that actually make money off of the ghost hunts, which it's a good thing because a lot of that money goes back into preserving the building. But I have over the years, I'm trying to be politically correct here. I think some of those stories and a lot of those buildings tend to get a bit exaggerated. And not necessarily by the people, the owners, if you will, but very often by the people who go in there, which if you think about it, and it's something that I've tried to research, in my mind, if you are going to spend the night in a haunted, I don't know, an asylum, let's just say, and you're paying $150 and you're going into a building that is supposedly the most haunted place on earth, and you paid $150, in my mind, you're kind of predisposed for having a whole lot of experiences. If for no other reason that your mind might play tricks on you because in the back of your mind, you're saying, this is what happened in this spot. Or the fact that you're saying, I just spent $150. I better see something.
Jen had a wonderful question, which was the most fearsome thing you had found on investigation.
And that's probably the Waverly Story, but I don't know if you've heard that already, Kat, and I should pick a new one.
You can tell that one because I am sure Christina and Jen have not heard it yet.
And I've been to Waverly, so I'm interested.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. The Waverly Story is one that when it initially happened, I wasn't scared anything, which sounds really bizarre when I tell this story, but it wasn't until about a year later when somebody at a presentation asked me, what's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you? And I told this story. And as I was telling it, I'm thinking, this is really scary. And for the longest time, I couldn't sleep, but the story was just frightening to me. I've gotten over that now, but I tell everybody when I tell the story to explain it because I can't explain it. And I want people to explain it to me because it would help me sleep better at night. So
before we start, Christina, how much time do we have?
Okay.
I'm gonna set it for 15 minutes.
Okay, we got 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That's plenty of time.
So I I was at Waverly Hills with a group. We had actually kind of bought the building out for the evening, so it was just us. It was our first time there. And so what we did is we got a tour. And as we were going on the tour, I traditionally ask, where should I go and what should I do if I want the best chance of experiencing something? So at that point in time, and this is going back over a decade, um, they said, well, where you should go is up to the fourth floor. And they said the fourth floor is home to a couple of things. A lot of people report seeing doppelgangers there or someone's double when they're up there. They also said that the fourth floor is where the creeper lives. And they described the creeper as being a all, I see the eyes getting big here. I should have warned you when the nightmare fuel was coming, and it's coming right now. The creeper was a black shadow figure, but it looked like a person, and it crawled on its hands and knees on the ceiling. And so I said, well, what I should have warned you. I told you. I said, well, what do you have to do to see the creeper? And they said, what you should do is you get one person and they go to one end of the hallway, and the rest of the group goes to the opposite end of the hallway, and you face each other and you turn off all the lights. And then the creeper will come creeping up behind the one person. So that was when I made the now infamous statement, well, I'll be the bait, because again, that's what I want. I want something to happen. So we went up to the fourth floor, and the fourth floor is nothing but patient rooms, but the doors are gone. So it's just doorways on the left and right going all the way down the hallway. And I had 3 other people with me. There were 2 guys and a girl, and they went to one end of the hallway. I went to the other, and we turned and we faced each other. And then we turned off all our lights. And what I did is I had an infrared video camera with me, and I put it down on the floor, like between my legs, facing them. And then I stood up, and I always wear a headlamp, but because it's like the Gremlins when you do an investigation with me, I always turn it on and blind everybody, bright light, bright light. So I always tilt it down so it just illuminates in front of me. So put the camera down, stood up, turned off the headlamp, and then just crossed my arms and just stood there in the dark facing them. So I guess 20 minutes or so passed. I don't hear anything. I don't see anything, feel anything. Absolutely nothing is going on. And then I hear one of the people in the group of 3 say, where did he go? And another person in the group says, I think he went in that room over there. And then I heard them go, Jim? And I said, yeah. And then I hear them say, the G-rated version, oh no, that wasn't him. So after we regrouped, one of the guys and one of the girls told the same exact story of what they had seen. So 2 independent people standing next to each other saw this happen. The other guy said he didn't see anything, but he left the group shortly thereafter, and we're not in contact with him anymore. But what they claim they saw is, after watching the shadow of me doing nothing for about 20 minutes, I turned on my headlamp, illuminated my entire body. I bent down, I picked up the camera, and I walked into the room to my left. I never moved. I never moved. And the scary thing is that I said, well, how did I come back? And what they said, and it made sense, is that they thought, even though we're supposed to announce when we're leaving, they thought I had just gotten bored and walked into the other room, because they said it was me and I left an empty hallway behind. So when they said, where did he go? I think he went in that room in there. Their eyes went from the middle of the hallway off to the right-hand side, where they thought that and when they called out to me, they were expecting me to call back and just say, yeah, I'm in here, I'm bored, or what have you. But when they heard me call back from the middle of the hallway, they looked back and I was there. But they both said I walked out of that hallway and I never moved. I don't know what that is. I can only tell you it's paranormal because it ain't normal. But was it a ghost? Was it a time slip? What, I don't know what it is. I only know that I didn't feel
Anything?
nothing at all. There was no missing time. There was nothing.
Mm.
And like I said, when it happened, I was like, well, that's kind of weird. But then when I retold it, I was like, wait, where did I go? The only thing that people have come up with that makes sense in a weird kind of way is that the ghost or whatever was doing something to them, was making them, or that perhaps there was like some sort of shield, or I don't know, or some sort of barrier that went up between us. Now, where that kind of falls apart is they said they saw me leave an empty hallway. So they physically saw me walk away, all lit up. And
Carrying a camera.
Yes. Yeah. Now, the video camera that I had does not, you hear the exchange of us talking back and forth, but that camera doesn't move until I pick it up afterwards.
Right.
So it was kind of like an illusion on their part projected by whatever it was that was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that is what led to what I call my 2-bottle conversations, because you need 2 bottles of a good wine or other spirit to really kind of dig into this, because I don't know what it is. And I think that's what is intrigued me the most, because I can't even say it happened to me, but I was clearly there. And the fact that 2 people saw the same exact thing, but that event did not happen it's weird.
Yeah, you were a participant in this phenomena, even though it didn't happen to you.
Yeah.
The thing that it reminds me of, and I know you ladies are probably going to sigh and look at the sky, it sounds like the Sedamsville Rectory issue we had, or I had. So a number of years ago, I saw a doppelganger and lived to tell the tale, but it was something very similar, but it wasn't broad daylight, but we had all the lights on in the building. And basically, to cut the story really super short, we had actually finished the investigation. It was a true 2-night investigation. There was only 5 of us in the building, and it was 4 women and 1 man. And we were just kind of shooting the breeze at the end, kind of winding down after what already had been an eventful, there we go, night. And one of the ladies, she was wearing one of those ghost hunting vests, that you see sometimes. It looks like a fishing vest, and they can just put all the stuff in their pockets. She was addressing one of the other ladies in the group, and I'm watching them while speaking to the gentleman of part of our party. And as I'm watching the woman wearing the fishing vest, she comes back towards us in the room, leaving our friend in the hallway. And then a double of her just swoops in from the darkened portion of the hallway. We can't see her face. We don't see her arms. She keeps them crouched up towards her chest, or her hands are towards her chest. And she actually had a conversation with our friend in the hallway. And she had no idea it was a double until her husband goes, "Hey," and she looks up, and as she looks up, this double just skitters back down the hallway and disappears.
Wow.
So your recount of your story sounds a lot like the one that I experienced, even though I actually was just a participant observer of it. Yeah. But it's freaky. We call it a doppelganger. That's what we've labeled it as. But
so
because it was
the point of them, like, why do they do these things?
That as a doppelganger?
Yeah.
I don't know. We did, again, long story, really, really short, is I am constantly admitting we don't have all the answers yet. So we're clearly doing something wrong. So we will mix up everything about how we go about investigations. We'll go totally old school and not use any equipment. Then we'll use all the equipment. We are always trying to mix things up. And one of the things that a member of the group, Josh, just came up with is that it was the idea that why don't we let the rooms and the building tell us where we should investigate? Let's just go where we're feeling things. And we would set up all the equipment and then take like 5 or 10 minutes to sort of decompress, to basically say, okay, you know what, when I get home, I got to pay the mortgage. I got to do this. But right now I'm just going to try to get in touch with whatever is in this building and just chill out. And we started getting really good results. But what we started getting was what we call like audio doppelgangers, which make no sense. And a lot of what we do on investigations, I try to steer away from digital voice recorders because there's no tape. There's nothing to really go back and analyze. And plus, you could be sucking signals from all over the place. So we try to stay away from wireless. So we use studio microphones that are hardwired into a mixing board and a whole 9 yards. We were doing an investigation where it was a commercial building where the gentleman in this very small office said that a woman would come up and like talk behind him. And when he turned around, there was nobody there. So I'm sitting there and Wendy is sitting in basically, if there was an office door right behind me, which was open, which led out to a hallway. Across the hallway was one of those fire doors, which was closed. And then that opened to a very large like conference center. And Wendy was always at the end there, like looking at the monitors, that sort of thing. About 10, 15 minutes go by, and I did have his backup, a digital voice recorder in front of me. We have to, and sorry if I'm going too fast, but we label any noise that we hear because we don't actually know who's going to go back, which person in the group. And so if we move a chair and it creaks and we don't call that out, it could be considered ghostly, if you will. So as I'm sitting there, I hear Wendy laugh in the other room. And I say it on the recorder. That's Wendy laughing in the other room. Time passes. Nothing is really happening. I go back over there, open the doors, go all the way through. And she's sitting there looking at the monitors. And I said, I don't think there's anything going on. And she said, no, the other group who was in the other part of the building, there's nothing going on with them either. And I said, what did you laugh at? And she's like, I didn't laugh. And I'm like, no, I did. I heard you laugh. And she's like, I didn't laugh. So I'm like, no, I know you did. And so I went back to my digital recorder and hit play on it. And you hear absolutely nothing. And then you hear me go, that's Wendy laughing in the other room. So then I was like, no, I know that I heard you. And then I thought, okay, I had maybe 2 feet behind me. So at 2 feet technically also closer to Wendy, a studio microphone that was facing towards me. So we pulled that up. And you also hear me say that's Wendy laughing in the other room. But right before that, you hear this very loud cackling noise that is not on any other recorder except that one. And it sounded like a Wendy, but it also sounded not like a happy Wendy. It wasn't a nice laugh. We made Wendy laugh from where she was and see if anything, the recorders could pick it up. They couldn't. We had that recording analyzed, not to say, is this a ghost? Because I don't know what a ghost is, but we asked, what can you make out from this? The noise fell within the range of a human voice. It was similar to Wendy, but lacked enough telltale characteristics that it wasn't Wendy. So something Wendy-like laughed and so that, again, 2-bottle conversation. Why is it doing that if it is a ghost? And why is it kind of disguising itself as Wendy? Yeah, I don't know. So those are the things that keep you going. You're like, where do they come from?
I never ever want to experience that ever.
I do.
You would be surprised though, if for no other, because that's the funny thing is I gave up being scared of this a long, long time ago, because to me, it's fascinating. And to literally come face to face with something that half the population doesn't think is real, it's kind of exciting. There is that fear of the unknown, but I've never felt that a ghost was going to, kick me, punch me, make me write a bad check, something like that. So you would be surprised. I think we need to take you out back when the new normal, whenever that is. Well, you'd be.
Yes,
Yeah, we'd love that.
We will go.
Yeah,
not with you two, no.
Why not?
Now you
Here's
said,
here's the thing that I tell people. Here's the only thing that you have to remember. If you go on an investigation with me and at any point you see me run, run. Don't ask questions, just run. It's probably a bear, but just run.
well,
I've
you
run
had
into
said-
skunks and raccoons.
you had mentioned nightmares. Like it seems like sometimes like something looms larger when you've had more time to reflect on it. Like
Yes.
you're not necessarily scared when you're seeing it, but like you said, you reflected on it later and found it very disturbing. Like after that revelation, did you have nightmares about it?
No, that's a great question, but surprisingly, no. And until the world fell off its axis this year, I didn't really have dreams or nightmares. I have both now, but I don't think that's related to the ghost. But no, surprisingly, I don't. When I get scared, like in that instance where I was more freaked out of the unknown aspect of it. So it wasn't anything that really kept me up or gave me nightmares or anything like that. As I said, it's something that I'm like, well, what was that? Where did I go? That's something that I kind of want to figure out because that, if you could replicate that, that would be crazy,
awesome.
but it's, yeah.
Yeah.
You ever tried doing it again? Have you gone back and tried doing it again?
We have.
Okay.
We went back and there is Astonishing Legends did a whole 4-hour episode about that because we got what I did not realize it was going to be as controversial as it was, but we went back. I stood in the same exact spot and there was a moaning noise that came right from behind me that you hear me whip around and there was nobody there. Unfortunately, there were other people in the building that came walking down the opposite end of the hallway and didn't announce themselves, which caused some people in the Astonishing Legends audience to think that we had either faked it or we had mistaken the guy who popped out and frightened everybody as it being them. And neither one of it was true. I'm the one who's hesitant to say that that was a ghost because it was so loud and it was right in my ear that and everybody heard it too. It wasn't more like an EVP thing where you hear it afterwards. Everybody heard it in real time. So we have tried to replicate things, not only just there, but other instances where we've gotten weird evidence, if you will. We'll go back and try to replicate it if for no other reason to say, well, we've checked all 20 boxes as to what it's not. We're kind of left with it's unknown what it is.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. Will you mind sharing with us where our viewers and listeners can find you if they're interested in following up with all of your adventures?
Sweet. Yeah. It really depends if you're into just the ghosts. I'm at ghostofohio.org. If you're into ghosts and all sorts of weird things like Crybaby Bridges or whether Paul McCartney died in a car accident, was replaced by a double, or what the heck the boy with the boot statue is. That's all at my author site, which is strangeandspookyworld.com. And if you just type, I love saying this, if you type Weird Willis into a search engine, you will find me and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of those sort of things. If you're into why my cats hate me and want me to go back and leave them alone during the day, you can find that's usually on Instagram. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And the books are all, if you're, most of the state books are available at the local libraries, so you don't even have to buy one. But I think usually if you go on to Amazon, they normally have the best prices. But the best thing is to come out and see when I give presentations. But unfortunately, I don't know when that's going to be. But that all of this COVID thing really made me realize the power of a ghost story is actually not only in the telling, but the sharing. Mm-hmm. And so my presentations, I show these weird pictures and video and audio. And to me, that's just the best part, to kind of get everybody in a room, because we might have different opinions on everything else. And I invite skeptics to talk but we can all come together and just share stories. And that to me is what I think the world needs right now. Just coming together and just relaxing and scaring the heck out of each other.
Yeah. And I can vouch for all the books are wonderful. I have read almost all of them, and
thank you.
First times in some cases. And and your presentations are some of the best that I've seen in the industry. So
man, how much do I owe you for that? Let me know.
I know, right?
I want to see one now. Yeah,
me too.
Yeah, they're very good, but because like earlier, we get very engrossed in your storytelling there, James. So, shall I share our information? Because I guess this is going to be the end of the show now.
This is the outro, yes.
This is the outro.
Yes. Thanks for being here. This has been so interesting.
Yeah,
it is my pleasure. Anytime.
We need to do a 2-bottle night.
Those are the best story. I mean, they truly are. I mean, they is when you just sit and the only thing that I tell people, because we do have our 2-bottle conversations, is you can't pretend you have all the answers. Mm-hmm. And that's when it's fun. I mean, even when we have our ghost meetings, what we do is I encourage everybody to bring in their ghost evidence. And then what we do is we present it and we fight over it. No, that's a ghost. And then what I'm looking for at the end is nobody knows what it is. Mm-hmm. So the skeptics in the group can't say, no, it was this. And the true believers can't say, no, it's definitely a ghost. You're just going, I don't know what this is. Those are those nuggets I really like. And those are the ones I could chew on forever. So
we'll
set up a 2-bottle.
They do peer review research. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I think you have to do that. And it's made me a lot of enemies in this field because they want, they're like, oh, I heard a knocking noise. It was a ghost. And I'm like, I wish I could do that. It would make my job a lot easier. But I again, going back to what I was rambling on about like 6 hours ago, is I think you have to admit there's some things that are not real, that are made up. And it's okay to do that. Just focus on the things you can explain, because that's the treasure trove to dig into.
Totally. Yes. And on that note, social media and...
Oh, yes. So on that note, everyone, please follow us on Twitter at Sin Cabinet Curio and Instagram at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities. And please share your hometown haunts. Send them to cincycuriosities@gmail.com. I'm Kat Klockow. This is everyone else. And keep it spooky. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving in America.
Bye. Thanks, James.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, guys. This was a blast.
This was so fun.